All right, everybody, good afternoon. Welcome into the live stream show here on a Friday. It is lunchtime, and boss man Blake Follis is here from Fantasy Sports Markets here to join me for a little fantasy advice as we get ready for week 4 of the top 25 college football DFS breakdown. Blake, you had some outstanding picks last week, and unfortunately you didn't win any money out of it because your management at Fantasy Sports Markets, but we thought it was important to try and help the people out once again and maybe turn this into a fun little afternoon Friday show. How you doing, man?
Doing well yourself, Benny?
I'm good. I'm ready to get this slate started. There's a big game for my Indiana Hoosiers. They are at home hosting a top 25 Michigan State team that I believe they have a chance to win. And I know that you might actually be looking at one Indiana running back in particular, so we'll get to some of your favorite plays coming up. Before we get to your plays, Blake, there is a new contest over at FantasySportsMarkets.com that you're putting your money where your mouth is. I've been doing that the first couple weeks for the NFL, and you've decided that you wanted some attention as well, and you wanted to see whether or not people could beat you in the sweepstakes after having such a good week last week. What is the new contest over at FSM?
I believe we have termed it Beat Bossman Blake.
Yes, that's correct.
And where this development of the name, the nomer that I'm now tagged with came from, I'm going to have to attribute that all to you, sir.
Okay.
And, but no, this is a great way to interact with us, be involved, and, of course, give you a great reason as a player to tell us what you like and what you don't like, and to see if you are actually smarter than I, which should not be too hard. I think there were only 4 people so far that claim to be smarter than myself, which is fine. We
just actually got it up to 5, so it is now 5 out of a total 25 spots, so there's still plenty of opportunities available to jump on board.
And the best part about this, just like playing against you, all you got to do is beat me, and you make money.
Exactly. Yeah,
I mean, you're going to win guaranteed money anyways if you finish in, the top 3?
Let's confirm that. I believe it's top 3 scores do win money, with first place being $10, so it's an opportunity to do 10 times your money over at FSM, which is pretty great. So yeah, first place is 10, second is 5, third is $3, and then every lineup that has a better lineup than you will take home $2. So you're right. Chance to double your money, get in on some of our college football action. And by the way, don't forget the Nelly competition is $5. I have a max entry of 5 with a total entry of 30. Right now, 11 out of 30 are signed up. We expect that contest to fill since it has the last 3 weeks for college football. So make sure you guys get in on that very quickly at FantasySportsMarkets.com, and you can use the promo code CFB18. CFB18. I can put that on the screen maybe at the end of the show. That gets you $5. So basically, if you want a free roll in there, there's your opportunity, CFB18 over on FantasySportsMarkets.com. So did you have any sort of big takeaways from what you saw out of the slate last week? And to me, it was just another stud performance by Kyler Murray, and he continues to sort of put the showcase on that maybe it's not Baker Mayfield, that maybe it's not just Kyler Murray. I mean, Lincoln Riley might be making a case for one of the best college football coaches in the country right after Nick Saban.
Well, as long as he can keep getting transfers to come in from Texas, he'll be in good shape. I think that, of course, Kyler Murray is in almost a league of his own, and it's, like I said last week, highly understandable why Oakland took him number 9 overall. The kid's got a rocket for an arm. I think the other thing that's been exemplified by him is the ability to use his legs. But the other things, looking back at last week, that I really enjoyed watching, Alabama really came into its own. Najee Harris Davis, I can't think of his last name right now. Their running back actually stepped up and did quite well. And, we actually got to see everything we wanted to. The unfortunate thing last week that we're actually going to be fortunate this week to get is Big 12 play. West Virginia didn't get to play last week. Their game with North Carolina State was canceled due to Hurricane Florence. Right. And, of course, all of our thoughts to those folks that are recovering and digging out and keeping their homes as much as they can. But those were some big things that we really jumped into as far as watching and enjoying, I think, as a whole.
Yeah, I think so too. That certainly stood out to me. And then on the slate, we already had an opportunity to kick things off with a couple games tonight. Florida Atlantic and the Lane Kiffin's squad is going up against UCF. That game starts at 6 p.m. Central Time. And then a little bit later on tonight, Penn State is on the road at Illinois. Those Friday night games tend to be very interesting. Sometimes I think, the Thursday night games sort of tended to be one of those upset plays of the week. So I don't know if you necessarily love anybody from the Friday night slate, and we'll go position by position in just a second, but I think especially with Mackenzie Milton and how unbelievable he's been so far over at Fantasy Sports Markets, he's been arguably a top 3 fantasy point scorer so far this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I like the quarterback play over at UCF as well. And, Lane Kiffin, he'll throw out some different players every now and then, especially through his offensive schemes. But the game that I'm actually going to be, the game I'm going to enjoy and watch tonight is the Penn State game. Going in there to Illinois, your home state, your stomping grounds.
That's right. And, used to be a big Illinois fan too back in the day. Then I ended up in Indiana.
Damnedest things. I'm not too sure on how it pans out with the. I have no idea what Illinois' history is going back in football. I know they've always had great basketball teams, and it was a little unfortunate to see the ending of the Beckman era out that way. But I think Illinois.
He was a bad guy. I'm not a Tim Beckman fan.
He was once an Oklahoma State's fan, so I'm kind of
a
little bit deep-rooted supporting on that end, right? And I think he had a good run in Toledo. It just didn't translate to Illinois. The other thing here is I like Penn State's team. They've got a good squad. Miles Sanders, he's been poised to really step off and have a great game. And I believe is it Trey McSorley?
Mm-hmm.
Trace McSorley. That's his name. Yeah, he's had some really good ball games as well.
Close enough for me. You're going to be able to find him when you type him into the search bar at Fantasy Sports Markets.
There's not a whole lot of quarterbacks with McSorley as their last name.
That's true.
Like Penn State.
That's very true. All right, so I know that's sort of one of the key guys you'll be watching Friday night, but let's get into the slate of quarterbacks. We've seen Mississippi State put up some monster numbers over the past couple weeks. You have Drew Locke, who's a really intriguing play, as Missouri hosts Georgia. I saw a stat that's pretty insane from the betting world that one casino has gotten $43 total on Missouri. Like, it's like 88% of the public is betting Georgia, whether it be money line, whether it be against the spread and giving up the points. So I think that sort of presents a really nice opportunity for Drew Locke to throw for a bunch of yards. You mentioned that Will Grier is back in action. They are at home against Kansas State. McSorley, Kyler Murray is in play as well. So who are a couple of the the quarterbacks that you're intrigued by heading into week number 4, I should say?
Yeah, so I went in and just kind of did a quick overlay of what all the schedule was to see who the top 25 teams were that we were going to have up this weekend. And also I, of course, pay attention to the different variables that go into play. I do pay attention to the Vegas odds to kind of see exactly where they're at. But I went through and I picked out 5 quarterbacks, and 3 of them I consider go-to, and 2 are under the contrarian play, which I know you're a big fan of.
I am, especially in these tournaments.
Absolutely. So the 3 go-tos that I have, of course, are Will Grier, and then I picked 2 that are actually going to be facing off against each other in Alan Bowman, who plays for Texas Tech, and Taylor Corndog Cornelius, who plays for Oklahoma State. And just to kind of go through there and tell you why I like those 3 as the go-tos. Will Grier, the guy's he's up there with Kyler Murray in being in a league of their own. I think you'd had a tweet earlier this week that there were 3 quarterbacks, and one I was going to put into my lineup this weekend, but it's always one of those things too that Kyler Murray is a guy that you can't ignore, but also in that same category is Will Grier, and Will Grier's only played 2 games this season. Of course, he has the great backstory history of playing for Dana, and I think he played for Florida State before that. But the key thing is just looking at the pure matchup here, and he's 46 of 60. He's got a 76, right around 77% completion. He's got 9 TDs and then 1 kind of throwaway interception, and he's thrown for 761 yards. Now, 761 in 2 games. That's quite a bit. So the notes that I've got on him are that K-State has a modest yards per game of 190 that they give up through the air. But West Virginia is West Virginia, and they're going to bombshell everybody, and they average about 382. And Greer also really loves to divvy up the ball to his wideouts. He's got 3 that he always hits, and this is something to kind of put on your roster idea for wide receiver plays. And Gary Jennings, David Sills, and Marcus Sims.
Yeah, all of them have been making a pretty dramatic impact all throughout the season.
Absolutely. And we do PPR, so this is to your advantage as well to consider them. Gary Jennings, he's got 12 receptions on the year. David Sills has 9, and Marcus Sims has 10. And they all, throw up their own numbers each and every game. The thing that I'm looking at here with K-State as being kind of a con as to why you would not consider Will Grier. K-State doesn't have a rush defense, which could shift off of Will Grier's passing attack and go straight into the rushing attack. So they what did I write down? K-State doesn't have a rush defense, which could leave the Grier lovers lacking. So that's where I was feeling on that one as I wrote it down. Jumping into the other game in the Big 12 with Alan Bowman and Taylor Cornelius facing off, I like Bowman just because he's your prototypical Texas Tech quarterback. He's going to go out there, throw up a bunch of yards and numbers that look really well for everybody. And so far, he's not really done anything but that. Last week, he was actually against Houston, the top quarterback as far as passing yards. I think he set the Big 12 freshman record. I don't know if it was a nationwide, but it was definitely a Big 12 freshman record, going 43 for 59, which, throwing 59 passes, you expect something, but it was also to 73% completion yards for 605 and 5 TDs, no interceptions. And that's against Houston. Houston is not exactly great, but they're not exactly bad either.
Right.
And that's just one of the things there. The con on picking Alan Bowman is he's a freshman. He's going to be inexperienced, but the upside is highly right there. In that, Oklahoma State, they're going to give up some average yards throughout the year, but they haven't exactly faced anybody that's really lit them up, except for Brett Ripien last week, who got them for 380 and 3 TDs. But Oklahoma State also made a halftime defensive adjustment and put Ripien in his box again. So I like the other thing that I like about Bowman is he throws to everybody, and so far his favorite threat to consider is Antwon Wesley. So that's also another wide receiver.
I'm a big fan, especially on this format, of doing a game stack of the quarterbacks if you believe a shootout is in place.
Absolutely.
And especially with these types of offenses. We talked about it last week. The Big 12 offense, lack of defense really throughout the entire league. I'd have to double check on what the expected total is for this game, but I would imagine it's in the 70s for sure. Just because both offenses like to go up tempo because they spread guys out. To me, that type of stack. Now, your risk assessment certainly goes through the roof because if this game ends up being closer scoring than we expect it to be, or maybe on the lower scoring side, or both of the defenses show up, then your tournament play is kind of screwed. But if you're going for it, if you're going for first place and an opportunity for that perfect roster bonus, which for the $5 Nelly tournament is $100,000 each and every week here at Fantasy Sports Markets, I certainly love the play. And remember, that's just 1 out of 5 lineups that you can put together.
Absolutely, and I just checked the over/under. It's 76.5.
Yeah, that's massive. In college football, the totals tend to be high, fairly high, but 76 is still a massive number. So I love the idea of targeting this game for sure. Any other quarterback plays maybe that are a little bit... I'm looking at some real contrarian plays. If you wanted to do maybe Adrian Martinez, the fact that he's probable could get a couple people off of him. I certainly think Drew Locke remains in play just because everybody expects Georgia to trounce him, so which likely means Missouri's going to have to throw the ball a lot. I'm not on McSorley, even though Penn State is massive road favorites. I think these Friday night games, especially in the Big Ten, tend to be a little bit weird. And if you're looking for, another one, I was going to say another Big 12 quarterback, but then I remembered that Texas A&M is no longer in the Big 12. Kelan Mond, with an opportunity, he's going to have to throw the ball a ton against Alabama. And A&M has had success at least staying with the Crimson Tide, and that's a guy that's going to be insanely low owned. He right now, I believe, is 10th in fantasy points per game over at FSM. So any of those other guys stand out?
Actually, you mentioned two that I picked as my contrarian plays, which is Drew Locke and Kellen Mond.
Okay.
I really I think the key thing with Drew Locke is he is a consistent quarterback each and every week. He's averaging right about 300, 325 each week through the air, and he's not making a lot of silly mistakes. I think the one that he really had last week against Purdue was the one that, his one lone interception. But the guy's thrown for 11 TDs and he's rushed for 2. So he's got some options there. His big thing is whether his offensive line can protect him and whether Larry Roundtree can give him a little breather at running back. But he's got 5 wideouts that he loves to target, and he locks them up. Kelan Mond, is in the same boat there. He's got it both through the arm and through the legs. He can pass for 6 and run for 3, and he's got 824 throughout just the air right now. But the key thing with Kelan Mond that really kind of put me onto him was his performance against Clemson. He went 23 of 40, 430 through the air. It was right about 60% completion, but he had 3 TDs and no interceptions, which against Clemson's a big deal if you don't have any interceptions against that defense, because they've got some athletes there just as well as they do in Alabama, and that's usually who we see at the end of the season. But the thing is if you flush him out, he's going to run, and if he throws, he's going to throw to Kendrick Rogers, and that's a guy that you want to also consider if you're going to do a team stack. And, I mean, we all know Bama, but we also have to respect what he did against Clemson. And I think you're absolutely right. That's something to take into consideration with Alabama and Texas A&M's history and what they do back and forth between College Station and Tuscaloosa.
Do you have any lineups with Mackenzie Milton or Dwayne Haskins this week, you think?
I don't, but if you want to go out on a limb, knock yourself out.
Okay.
So.
Let's move on to the running backs for Week 4 in college football. And right at the top of the list remains Jonathan Taylor, who's been the Big Ten Player of the Week 2 weeks in a row. Not leading up until Wisconsin's surprising loss at home to BYU last week. But Taylor's still the number 1 scoring fantasy running back over at Fantasy Sports Markets with 28.6 fantasy points per game. And A.J. Dillon of Boston College has been a part of the Heisman conversation. He's been terrific. A couple other intriguing guys in play. We've talked about all the firepower from Mississippi State with Kalen Hill. If you're looking back at Texas Tech, is it Tazon Henry? Is that how you pronounce his name, Blake?
I have no idea. I'm not watched enough Texas Tech football to know exactly who he is.
And a guy who I shared my namesake with, Benny Snell Jr. for Kentucky, off to a terrific start going up against Mississippi State in SEC play, where both of those offenses have been great so far. So some of the running back plays that you like this week.
So you mentioned Jonathan Taylor, and that's a guy who I'm fading this week.
Really? Okay, on the road at Iowa, that makes sense.
Absolutely. Iowa's only giving up about 42 yards a game. I think their defense is really stacked against the run, so they're going to force you to beat you by the air. And that's, kind of just old school Iowa ball. That's what they like to play. And when they get the ball, they like to run it. So we'll see kind of how that one plays out. But looking at that, I get into, again, going back to that Penn State game tonight, that's the one that I really think Miles Sanders is going to take off and just have a great game. Illinois is giving up a pretty respectable 154 per game through the ground, but they haven't really played anybody yet. And as I said on my notes here, they're on the Sanders train, and the tracks they're on the tracks, and the Sanders train's coming through tonight. So I butchered that one. The con against this deal, again, going back to it, and while you weren't big on McSorley, but why I'm kind of big on McSorley is because Illinois gives up 325 through the air. And Penn State has a tendency, when they smell blood in the water through the air, they tend to go that way. That's what they did a couple games ago, where we thought Sanders was going to have a big one, and he kind of had an okay game. And I think that could happen again tonight. But like you said, you never know on a Friday night in the Big Ten what's going to end up happening. So you could have a total explosion on working up into the offensive game through the ground, or you could have it through the air, or who knows, Illinois could turn around and win this game. You just never can tell.
Illinois was in a situation last week too, and I didn't get a chance to watch the entirety of the game, but I was keeping my eye on it. They had a great opportunity in a game at Soldier Field in Chicago to beat USF. And USF's a good football team with Charlie Strong as their head coach, and it's a really good defense. And Illinois was up on them for a while, and then they basically let them right back in the second half, got very conservative with their game plan. And I wonder, with a home game and a short turnaround time this week, if they're going to try and be a little bit more aggressive. I know it's not Lovie Smith's it's not really a part of his DNA to be an aggressive type of coach on the offensive side of the ball. He's always been known as a takeaway type of guy on the defensive side. But Illinois does have some playmakers, and I think Penn State's goal, obviously, is to get the running game established. But I still wonder, I still feel like this game's going to be closer than most people think.
It probably will be, and I think a lot of that, like you said before, has to do with the Friday night aspect of it. It's party night for college students, so it's going to be a good time for them.
It'll be a solid atmosphere, no doubt.
Yeah, and so, moving away from that, the other running backs that I'm considered, you'd mentioned earlier, Stevie Scott,
my guy,
being kind of the contrarian play, and you'll have to talk about Indiana a lot more than I will on this one. I love his numbers. I think he's a workhorse. He's got 69 carries for 388. Everybody else, I think Miles Sanders is just under 50 for 295. And so he's already outpacing Penn State's running back on that one. 3 TDs. Michigan State shows a strong rushing defense, but they exactly haven't played anybody substantial that has a solid running back either. And I just don't think you can deny Stevie Scott. I think, once they get going, they keep going.
So, being the lone Indiana football expert on this show, here's what I will say. I think Stephen Scott as a freshman has been a fantastic addition to this team. He is big, he is strong, he's physical. Running style is sort of very reminiscent to that of LeGarrette Blount when he was at Oregon, and almost to a certain extent how he's looked in the NFL as well. It's bruising. He tends to be a little bit more of a speed guy than people expect for somebody with such a big, strong frame. And I think Indiana, in order to have any sort of success against Michigan State, is going to have to use him. But the problem is Michigan State is arguably the best team in the country at stopping the run. And they've had their issues. I know they had that loss to Arizona State this year. But they are really good at stopping the run. They are very stout up front. And I just don't know how much Indiana will be able to gain with Scott. I think he has touchdown potential. If they have a play to get him down to the goal line, he's going to be the guy there. They want to make sure that Peyton Ramsey takes care of the football. And he's the veteran quarterback too. But I honestly think in order for Indiana to win, Ramsey's got to make plays with his arm. And so I wonder whether or not Stevie Scott's going to get those opportunities that we've seen in weeks past where they've had, wins against Virginia. And that was a game that was in a monsoon at Indiana, and the win against Ball State. And then the road win against FIU. So I love Stevie Scott, but I think it's an ultimate contrarian play just because of how good Michigan State's been against the run all season.
I think so, but when you have somebody like Stevie Scott, you're going to feed him the ball and he's going to keep moving the sticks. You can't go away with him until he gives up finally. But other running backs to consider. One that's actually going to have a really cake game, and this is BYU's running back, and I would pick him on name alone. His name is Squally Canada, and he's had 51 for 265, and he's had 5 TDs. But he is also the man who milked Wisconsin for 118 and 2 TDs. And this is going to be a cruise control game, which is going to be a pro and a con. But he's, again, it's going to be a play alone just on the name. It's like picking horses at the racetrack. If you don't know anything about horse racing, you sometimes just go with the name or the color. It's usually the gray horse and the pink silks. But the key thing that I'm looking at on this, there shouldn't be any reason for him to not at least get 100 yards and allow for some other play to take place. Other quarterback or running backs that I like, my man Justice Hill out of Oklahoma State he's got 34 carries for 277. So he's almost averaging 10 yards a carry, and he's got 4 touchdowns. The nicest thing about Justice Hill is he's an all-around player at running back. He can run the ball and he can catch the ball. And last year against Texas Tech, he went for 164 on the ground on 31 carries. And he even caught a touchdown. So he's going to have a monster game. I think he had 2 receptions. So that's 2 PPR points, but 1 is for a TD. And then so you're looking at this going, okay, shootout. Oklahoma State's known to throw the ball around, but they also love to integrate the run. Just because, and I think this is where Indiana may take a note from the book, is if you can suck a defense in, on the run, then you're going to turn around and throw the ball and have some success. Now, when you start throwing the ball, that's when you turn around and go back to the run. Oklahoma State's notorious for doing that, and I think looking back at Tech, they give up 161 on the ground, but they got lit up by Ole Miss, and they did look solid against Houston last week, but I think justice will be served tomorrow by Mr. Hill.
There you go. Justice Hill is a solid play if you're going to be looking again at this Friday night matchup between Florida Atlantic and UCF. Devin Singletary is one of the highest projected players at his position to succeed in a PPR format, which is how it is on fantasy sports markets. A.J. Dillon always in place for Boston College. He's always a solid play there. And then if you believe that Georgia is going to take care of Missouri on the road, maybe you look at somebody like DeAndre Swift as an upper guy to really sort of help chew down the clock, especially in the second half. Any other running backs that maybe we've missed on so far?
I think Miami's got a running back this week. They're playing FIU, who you'd mentioned earlier. They're 26.5-point favorites. Theirs is DJ Dallas.
Okay.
And he's
also another solid name.
Yeah, he's got kind of, one of those games that it should be expected that he's going to put the points up. He's had kind of laissez-faire games early in the season, played LSU, didn't have much success, didn't play much against Savannah State, and Toledo, he lit him up last week for 110 and had a touchdown as well. Not just he's a sophomore too, so he's young. He's just going to get in there and have some play. Miami's looking for a really good game to step off on outside of the last 2 weeks, but this is part of their non-con. That's just going to be a cakewalk for them for a little bit. Going back, actually, just because we like to look at things like odds every now and then on this show, Michigan State's only a 6-point favorite at Indiana. What's that tell you on that?
It tells me that Indiana's got a good shot to surprise them, considering that Michigan State's the number 24 team in the country, and Indiana still has a history of getting off to these really good non-conference starts and then bringing in a top squad. Everybody gets excited, and then they somehow find a way to let you down. Indiana, although, I will say this about the Hoosiers, it's sort of been persona non grata for them to have these games where, especially at home, they're in it the entire time and then find a way to blow it at the end. So, they've had games against Michigan State before in the past where that's how it's gone down. Same thing with Iowa. I can think of I call it the Jordan Howard game, when Jordan Howard was on the Indiana, and he rushed for 200-something plus yards against Michigan. I believe it was in either Jim Harbaugh's first or second season, where he was just an absolute stud. They went to overtime and just stopped feeding Jordan Howard. And Michigan ended up winning, I think, in double overtime. And it was just, my heart was just taken and stomped and thrown on the ground. And they'll do this. And so they'll play Michigan State tough. I have no doubt about it at home. I don't think Michigan State goes there, especially because of their offensive or lack of offensive weapons. I don't think they go and just pound the hell out of Indiana. They're an improved defensive team. Tom Allen, their head coach, has a defensive coordinator background. That's how they got hired after they got rid of Kevin Wilson. So they're going to play him tough. So the -6 for Michigan State on the road doesn't necessarily surprise me here.
So, well, if that's the line you think, I think this may be a good year for Indiana football then. And
I've been hearing that for the last 10 years. It's what's the name of the Greek mythology character that pushes the boulder up the hill? And he's destined to do so, and then every time he gets it up to the top of the hill, the boulder rolls back down. He's got to start over again. That's being an Indiana football fan.
All right, well,
Sisyphus, maybe?
Do what?
Somebody on Facebook Live hopefully can help us out with this.
I'm sure somebody can look up Greek mythology.
Yeah, there's got to be somebody.
So there's actually three running backs that I like, other than the ones that we've mentioned.
Okay.
These are going to be more on the chalk play.
Yeah.
Travis Etienne with Clemson, Deshaun McLeese with Virginia Tech, and Mike Weber, Ohio State. These are going to be cakewalk games for those guys. That's, again, a pro and a con. The pro is that they're going to have some good yards. The downside is that they could be pulled early just to preserve them. Again, you mentioned this is week 4, so this is kind of the time you're walking out of the non-conference schedule and getting into the conference schedule next week for a lot of teams. And if you want to win your conference and go to the playoffs and play for national championship like Nick Saban loves to do, you go ahead and take that route and start resting some of your guys that don't need to be beat up as much. And so that's really where I'm at on the running back deal. I think, again, I'd stay away from Jonathan Taylor this week just because I don't like the game with Iowa. And he could prove me completely wrong, go for 300 yards, and make me look like a fool. But it's
college football. Yeah, that's true.
That's right.
For those of you guys that are just jumping on, either on Periscope or on Facebook Live, welcome in. He's Bossman Blake. He is the Director of Management at Fantasy Sports Markets. My name is Ben Heisler. I am the Director of Media Operations here at Fantasy Sports Markets. We are doing a college football DFS breakdown here on a Friday during your lunchtime. Wanted to give you an opportunity to know about a couple of our college football contests that will really kick off starting tonight at 6 o'clock with that UCF Florida Atlantic game. For those of you guys that are playing, we have a couple really big contests over on the college football slate at Fantasy Sports Markets. If you go there to fantasysportsmarkets.com, you'll notice right at the top of the college football page, there is a $5 contest with $50 to first with 30 entries. Currently, there are 11, so there's plenty of overlay for you guys to jump on in. $50 to first with a $100,000 perfect roster bonus. All you got to do is choose 8 guys. And if your lineup hits, congratulations, you are now $100,000 richer. There is also, if you're looking for something a little bit lesser stakes, there is a $1 Beat Boss Man Blake contest. That's the name of the guy that we are having on this show right now. He is our college football expert here at Fantasy Sports Markets. It's very simple. It's top 25 action. All you got to do is fill out a lineup. Your $1 entry, if it beats Bossman Blake's lineup, will double its money into 2 with $10 to first place, 5 to second, and that's also a total entry of 25. Earlier in this video, and you can watch this later on Facebook Live and on Periscope, we've broken down the quarterbacks and the running backs. Let's get to the wide receivers before we wrap things up here. And it's another week where it's a little bit more spread out, and obviously you've talked about the quarterbacks that are going up against each other in the Big 12 as part of your likely lineup. I would imagine, too, that if you're going to stack the quarterbacks, you got to stack the wide receivers in a game stack here, too.
Absolutely, and I'd mentioned some earlier on West Virginia and their program. Again, Jennings, Sills, and Marcus Sims. If you just want to go with a full West Virginia stack this week, it's probably to your benefit because until K-State does something on defense, I don't believe they have one. And that's just kind of a way it is with them. The ones that do stand out, though, outside of West Virginia, again, I had mentioned Texas Tech's wide receiver Antwon Wesley. He's right now sitting at number 5 overall in receiving yards in the nation. So he's got 413 yards that he's hauled in on 23 receptions. Now think about that too. That's 23 points going directly to you, the player, on a PPR game. So it's to your advantage. He's likely going to be covered up, but again, Alan Bowman likes to diversify where he throws the ball. So not everything's going to go to him, but a lot of it probably will. The other guys that I've got, Tylan Wallace for Oklahoma State. I'm going back to the well on him. I mentioned him last week. He's a young receiver, but he's going to Tylan Wallace is going to get the ball. He's got 19 receptions right now for 319, and he's hauled in he's hauled in 2 touchdown receptions, but I think it continues to increase this. Yeah, and this weekend, without Texas Tech actually having a defense or knowing what to do on defense, it's only going to go up from there.
Yeah, that's not a 2018 thing. That's an every year thing for Texas Tech.
Every single year, and it's also for Oklahoma State too. They just kind of lock and load and reload and keep going from there. But those are kind of the 2 key players that I'm at. I love Marquis Brown. He's going to be on each and every week with Oklahoma, especially if Kyler Murray's going to keep throwing in the ball. He's going to keep catching it. The one play that I like is going to be Jeff Thomas, and he's a wide receiver for Miami this weekend. I guess he plays for them every weekend, but they're playing FIU this weekend. And, he's had a pretty good game, and if I can pull his stats back up, I had him just earlier today. It didn't write them down.
While you're looking for them, I'll give a couple guys that I like this week as well. Wesley and Jennings, I think, are absolute studs, and both of them have been top 2 in fantasy points per game at FSM. Another guy that bounces up is Rondale Moore with Purdue. We saw the type of numbers in the shootout that they had last week at home against Missouri, and that was with a backup quarterback for Purdue. So they got a noon kickoff time against Boston College. We've obviously talked about Dillon for them. Emmanuel Hall's put up some monster numbers. He's currently questionable, but if you're absolutely considering playing Drew Locke, you got to make sure Emmanuel Hall's in there as well.
Because he is the main go-to for Missouri. Without him, they are going to struggle on the passing game.
Yeah, so if he's playing, if he's playing, then you need him to be paired with Locke without a doubt if you're going to have a chance to win this tournament.
Yeah, if you're going to go with Locke, you got to go with him.
No doubt.
And without a doubt, on that deal, going back again, I had Jeff Thomas's numbers. There are 11 receptions for 304 and 2 TDs. He had a blow-up game last week against Toledo. The key thing with him is he's going to be your big wide receiver play. Much like we do in NFL, we look for the guy who's going to not always get the most receptions. That's a huge plus. We like the targets, but the guy is also going to be the big playmaker because in 2 or 3 plays, he can make your winning lineup, and sometimes he can lose your winning lineup. So that'd be kind of the contrarian play on that one as far as wide receiver goes.
Are you in on Jerry Jeudy at all this week for Alabama?
No, I don't. I think you're getting too weird on that Texas A&M game to jump into that ball. Mm-hmm. If you want to, though, it's obviously your money. So,
well, alrighty then.
If you're feeling strong, by all means. But I love, as always, the Big 12 has the wide receivers that put up the big numbers because they have the quarterbacks who throw the ball because they don't have any defense. So it works in favor of anybody playing those players.
If you're playing Greer for West Virginia, how do you feel about just going a full-on double wide receiver stack with Jennings and with Sills? Just saying, basically, I think West Virginia is going to just trounce Kansas State at home. I know, obviously, your risk goes up, but do you feel like with the amount that he spreads the ball out, that those are probably the 2 guys to capitalize on?
Yeah, and if you really wanted to throw a good wrench out there, go ahead and put Sims on your flex, and that way you could have a full wide receiver stack that way. I think it's kind of one of those enticing moves for Dana Holgorsen to consider that K-State doesn't have a rushing defense.
Right.
So maybe he starts feeding the ball to his running backs, but Sills and Jennings, they should have a game. The other guys that I would consider as far as stacks, again, going to the technical Oklahoma State game, Cornelius and Wallace, and then also Dylan Stoner, who's a wide receiver for Oklahoma State. He's been having a great season so far. He's going to be your PPR guy. He's like kind of the Chris Hogan esque type player who's going to be there, your safety valve player, but he's also got
Shifty,
some big play.
Goes across the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coach's son.
Who was the guy?
Workout warrior.
Yes, he's on that level, and this guy, I can't think of his name. It's like fleeting my mind. He played for Texas Tech. He played for New England.
Oh, I think he played Amendola?
No, not Danny Amendola. It's before him. The one that had the concussions, dropped the touchdown in the end zone with the Patriots.
Wes Welker?
It's like Wes Welker.
Okay.
Wes Welker. He's a Texas Tech grad, actually from Oklahoma City. I believe he played at a private school there.
Okay. Yeah, Wes Welker, Danny Amendola, they're pretty much the same guy.
Yeah, same guy reincarnated.
Yes.
Except one had to get stalled out in St. Louis for a little while. So no, I think Stoner's along that line. He's kind of got that prototypical feel to him. The downside with Oklahoma State, and this is my con against Cornelius, he throws silly interceptions. He'll get into the red zone, be within 15 yards, and then just throw a pick.
Right.
And blows your points right there. The nice thing about what he did last week, I think, is he realized where his faults are and started running the ball more. He had, I think, he had 2 touchdowns last week against Boise State, just on the ground. I don't know how many yards he had rushing, but it was enough to where he was able to offset his experience in the passing game and realize that he's got legs and he can run. He's a big guy too. I think Oregon's also the Oregon-Stanford game intrigues me, not enough to where I'm just jumping on the bandwagon yet for either one of those teams. I don't know actually if Bryce Love is back.
I just think it's more of a fun entertainment game than a game that I necessarily want to have exposure to in college football DFS.
Right, but that's also kind of the reason that you would also go with the Oklahoma State Tech game, because you know it's going to be at least a volume game as far as points and getting yours.
Right,
Larry.
but I think the difference is you have a better idea as far as predictability on the Big 12 matchup as opposed to the Pac-12.
Absolutely,
at least for me.
But you also have to. I mean, you got to respect JJ Arcega-Whiteside, because I mean he's like right now he has 13 receptions for 324 and 5 TDs, and if you want to get into that, I don't think Oregon's got the defense. Yeah, they're giving up 226 in the air right now. I don't think they've got enough to offset going against Stanford. Like I think Stanford's going to have some ball games. Do we know if Bryce Love is going to be back this weekend?
Haven't seen anything that would completely dictate whether or not he's back or not. That's something that we can look up, and obviously, any college football updates we'll post on the Fantasy Sports account.
RotoWire and Brett McMurphy, of all people, that guy has said he's coming back.
Oh, so McMurphy's reporting that he's going to play?
He's expected to play this week against Oregon, so he may be the go back to your running back.
He was cleared a couple days ago, but the question was, just because he was cleared wasn't necessarily going to be indicative of him playing. I knew that they didn't want to necessarily rush him back, but I mean, if he's good to go, it's crazy to think
Oregon Live. Yeah, Oregon Live reports he's ready to go.
Which would actually be pretty remarkable to consider Bryce Love just a couple weeks ago as a contrarian play, but the reality of the situation is he might be now. And it's a good matchup if you believe he's ready to go, if you believe the workload will be there, then he's in a great spot. All right, a couple more minutes here. We'll get to maybe a tight end or two, because those are always probably the toughest to predict when it comes to the college football slate. As far as fantasy points per game goes, Brevin Jordan of Miami has been an absolute beast so far this season on the Fantasy Sports Market site.
Shut out last week, though.
He was, so it sort of goes to the fact that he was so good early on that he's already racked up these big fantasy points per game numbers. They got a really good matchup too, does Miami. Ray Martin is another intriguing guy for Boston College on the road at Purdue, who gave up a ton of points last week. Noah Fant with Iowa in sort of one of those short passing tight end games is going to be intriguing. The owner of the men's suit store, Irv Smith Jr., the fictitious men's suit store, because that's the type of name that Irv Smith sounds like. It sounds like you go to Irv Smith to buy yourself a suit and get a tie for free. And then maybe Bryson Hopkins for Purdue as well, if you're going to look at that Boston College and Boilermaker game with a lot of points there. Who are you looking at as far as tight ends go?
So you mentioned Noah Fant. I like him because he's leading Iowa in reception yards. Another guy that I actually like is a guy who had a pretty good game last week against Wisconsin, and that is Moroni Lualu-Patua. I have no idea how to spell his last name, but he's the only guy on BYU's team that is really catching the ball right now. And again, against McNeese State this weekend, there should be no reason that he doesn't just have a good, or McNeese State, who cares? Why are they even playing ball? But that's the key thing right there, is you look for the tight ends who are actually the leading receivers for the teams, and if you can't hunt those guys out, then it's not really to your interest to play these games. So can't rely on us to do all your homework. Go do it yourself.
Yeah, but at least we're trying to give you, at least make it a little bit easier for you.
Right.
So yeah,
I will say that looking at the reception leaders in the NCAA right now, there's not one tight end in the top 40. So this is your homework play if you have to make one at all. Everybody else is considered chalk based on schedule. This is the one where you find where the winner's at. And so my favorite are those two guys, Noah Fant and Moroni, tight end for BYU.
Yeah. I think Hopkins is in play for Purdue. I think Sweeney is in play for Boston College. Those early games with a lot of points and tight ends getting volume, I think is intriguing there. So there you go.
You know what, Ben? I had no idea that Boston College was actually ranked until you said something a little while ago.
I know. They sort of snuck in.
Completely overlooked them altogether.
Yeah.
The only thing that scares me on that one for playing anybody, it's 11 o'clock game, and it's at Purdue. So Purdue may have the upper hand. Who knows?
Yeah, but then again, I sort of look at BC, who ranked 23rd in the country. The over-under in that game is 64.5, so it's not at the level of some of the Big 12 matchups we were getting into before. But they're going to put up some points now, and they're also one of those teams where it's been a long time since BC was any good at football, and so a lot of times it's the teams that have done this for a while that tend to sleep through some of these road 11 a.m. Central Time starts, and they don't strike me as that type of team because they haven't really gotten to that level yet. And it's still an out-of-conference game. Purdue, I think they're going to see the fact that Purdue put up a ton of points last week. So I still see this as a high-scoring affair.
Let me ask you, as far as game predictor, do you think Nebraska gets its first win in the last 5 against Michigan this week? Or do you think they can continue on the L train?
It's funny because I don't love either of these teams. I'll still give it to Michigan because they're at home. And they're just sort of it's sort of the battle of which team is less of a mess. So I will give the edge to Jim Harbaugh. Listen, Nebraska will get itself turned around at some point. The problem is that they're chasing after the Osborne days, and it's just not a reality anymore. Like, Frost is a good coach, but they're going to be slow, and they let one get away the last week. So I think if Michigan was coming into Lincoln, then I would say Nebraska gets their first win. But I think at Michigan Stadium, that's a difficult ask for anybody.
I think if I were going to go with it, I think I'd go ahead and take Nebraska this weekend just because nobody's expecting them to win. They're 18.5-point dogs. I think they cover for sure.
Oh, I think they cover as well. That's a Jim Harbaugh special, is not covering the spread.
But I think it may be also one of those things too, that Nebraska's a talent-wise, coaching-wise, I think I'm a big fan of Scott Frost. I'm all aboard that train. Yeah. I think that he's gonna put together enough of a game plan just because he's obviously frustrated with how they've played the last couple of weeks, but it's going to be one of those that Michigan may be overlooking this game, and it comes back and bites them. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a Jim Harbaugh special to keep you in the ball game, but it's also to Jim Harbaugh's disadvantage. Ask him about that Michigan State game a couple years back and how that one turned out. But those are games that we'll see. I like them. I like all the players. I hope everybody signs up, can beat me. If anything is evidence that I may or may not know what I'm talking about, it's this video right here. And
we will be able to have it. And then don't forget our college football code if you want to give us a try. Promo code CFB over at Fantasy Sports Markets gets you $5 to try it on us. That is an entry, ladies and gentlemen, into our $5 Will Nelly contest, where you have up to 5 entries and a chance to win up to $100,000 with a perfect roster bonus. So sign up for that. Sign up to beat Blake. You got any last words before you put your roster up?
I want you to go ahead and plug the podcast on iTunes, Anchor, and Overcast.
Yes, absolutely. It's available in, actually, I believe 9 different places you can find the Fantasy Sports Markets podcast. The easiest place to find it is at our Anchor page, which is anchor.fm/FSM, and that'll give you a link to iTunes and the Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, 4 or 5 other places that you can get your podcast downloaded. You can find us there for the Fantasy Sports Markets podcast. Had a really good week of shows, too. We had Elliot Chris from the Quan Edge give his breakdown for Week 3 of the NFL. Terez Paylor, the national senior NFL writer for Yahoo Sports, was on Monday. And I'm going to get killed by whoever I brought on Tuesday for not mentioning who we had on, but it was another really good interview.
Retgo.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm in so much trouble. I'm gonna tell you who it is because I'm gonna be mad at myself. But I mean, we're bringing you content 3, 4, 5 times a week. Sarah Tiana, the outstanding comedian. Oh, our guy Rob Bolton. was on
yes.
Tuesday and Wednesday this week, breaking down the PGA championship, the Tour championship.
How's Tiger doing, Ben?
Yeah, I shouldn't have faded him. I know that he was tied with Ricky Fowler for the lead yesterday. I haven't had a chance to check the scores. I would imagine Tiger is likely doing well because I faded him, which tends to be the case.
I'm checking on that right now for you. See how he's.
All right. So while you're
up.
checking on them, I will give folks one more reminder, not just the podcast, but also if you enjoy, asking us questions on Twitter for fantasy advice, highly encourage you guys to come and join us Sunday mornings, 9 a.m. Central Time. We are here for FSM Football Sunday. It's a full hour, very similar to this type of show. We go through the games, breakdowns across the slate. We take your questions on Facebook Live and on Periscope. We are here for you, and we've really enjoyed it the first couple weeks. Have a special guest planned for week number 3. Still trying to finalize a few of the details there. Yeah, I know. It's not going to be Boss Man Blake. We're saving him for our college, so you get to sleep in on this Sunday.
I'm off the hook.
Yeah, exactly. So you can sit back and relax a little bit. So, did you find out is Tiger up?
He's not teed off yet. He and Ricky tee off in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay.
So they'll go out and hit the links.
We'll see whether or not fading Tiger was the right decision. Hopefully you guys decided to do otherwise and not take my advice for that play. Although I did say to play Ricky Fowler, and I feel good about that.
Did you add Rahm?
Did not go with John Rahm.
2 under right now, sitting 4 under overall.
No, I was big on Justin Rose this week.
Ooh, just birdied. He's 5 under now, so he's 3 under for the day.
Justin! Love it. For Boss Man Blake, go up against him this week at fantasysportsmarkets.com. Beat his lineup and double your money. And then don't forget about the Beat Benny Heist contest for NFL Week 3 on Sunday. We'll talk to you guys on Sunday, 9 a.m., right back here. Until then, good luck, everybody, and have fun over at fantasysportsmarkets.com. Win the monies. Talk to you soon.